after the midterm notes. So grading is in progress. Regular office hours will be suspended until it's finished and will be distributed and discussed when finished also, so that you get a sense of what it is how I graded it. One thing that you need to resolve shortly is make sure that your Google Sheets via Swarm IFTTT is in place so that you are eligible for a copy of the last exam. So make sure this is working. And you should note also that any absences should be noted in your attendance sheets. I'm not looking back through the emails to see if you actually had contacted me and said, I'm not going to be in class, and so that's fine. You should try to do that there. That way I don't just see, I see some non-check-ins, and it would be nice to just be able to look at that and say, okay, they did contact me and said that they were not going to be in class. Put that into your sheet directly. So as always, try to make it the name. If yours is already working, you don't have to do the last part here. Set that up yet. Please try to use this convention to make it easy for me to find your thing, your check-in. Your logs. Sorry. Okay. We talked about project 2, but just as a reminder, this is a project where you're going to take a picture of several pictures of an object, and then we'll create a 3D point cloud of that. So the idea here is to introduce you to not just 2-dimensional data, but 3-dimensional representations of structures. And this will be something that actually leads into a couple of topics that we discuss in some of the video podcasts and presentations. Project number 3, which will be assigned in a couple of weeks, is based on a combination of pictometry or Eagle View. Change that. And the GIS, the ArcGIS Online. And it's based on the lectures by Andy Mandola and Blair Tinker. Blair will actually be here next week to try to give you a quick tutorial on the ArcGIS Online to allow you to finish the last project. And I think it's going to be a cool one where you actually go around campus and essentially take data of different features and try to show that on a map. Much the same way that Jon Snow went around, marked off where everybody died, and essentially came up with some analysis. So that'll be something that will be discussed next week. Next week also, we'll have Brian come back and give you a lecture on databases. So it's sort of be the next application that we'll be working with, and that's actually Lab 6. So some of you have asked about Lab 6. I sort of pushed Lab 6 later just to give Brian a chance to prepare for the lecture and then give that to you. And we'll give an exercise with that also. So. The reading that I assign for the second half of the semester is Gutenberg the Geek by Jeff Jarvis. It's not as long as the Weapons of Math Destruction, but it's still, I think, a very interesting read because it actually shows the historical perspective with regard to technology, in particular the printing press. And a lot of people think that what happens in Silicon Valley is new stuff. In reality, back in his day, he went through the same types of issues with regard to making an invention, protecting that invention, finding capital to build that invention, and then trying to basically disseminate that invention as a standard. Okay, so there is this cycle that went through several hundred years ago in much the same way that some of the cycles that we see now in technology occur. So it's just a sort of an illustration that fact that what you may think as novel and new is really not if you look back on history. And this will also sort of give you an idea of where some of these things may lead in the future, albeit in a much more rapid pace. Okay, there's several hundred years of time lag. And that's typically the case with technology. You'll have what are known as S-curves, where sudden speed up of technology will just go faster and faster and faster. And that's why I always say that you will always be a newbie, because things will change so quickly that you have to be able to unlearn and relearn new things. So Gutenberg the Geek, based on initial gradings of the weapons of mass destruction, we may actually have to revisit that question, just because of the fact that it was rather obvious that some people did not touch on the subject. So we may have to revisit that. Again, the idea here is for you to learn the concepts. If you don't do it the first time, it's called a mistake, and you try to learn from that. So we may have to revisit that in the last exam. So as far as the last exam is not being cumulative, I do take the reserve the option to revisit any topics that may not have been well represented in the midterm, and I may take that as a fault of both myself and the class. But again, the idea is not so much the test itself, but the topics behind it. So. MakerBot Industries is a interesting video podcast which has to do with 3D printing. It's not so much the technology that I want you to see from this or actually study, but the person behind that. And the guy's name is Gray Pettis. He is essentially one of the people who was very enamored with this technology, that he actually became sort of an evangelist of this technology, much to the point where now you can go to Staples and buy your own 3D printer. There was a time when this was something that was very hard to come by. Gray Pettis is one of those people who sort of pushed the technology and did so with a passion. And one of the things that I want people to take out of this is that he was not a trained technologist. Okay, as you go through this podcast and you realize what his background was, you'll kind of like be surprised by the fact that he really wasn't trained in engineering, in the hard sciences or anything like that. But he was just so fascinated by the prospect of making a technology that people can use in the future, that he just pursued his quote unquote dream. So I think that says something to the fact that even though you may not necessarily be in technology right now, you may find yourself in the future in technology, just because it may be something that really interests you. The 3D printing has really changed a lot of things, in particular the ability to create an object from a concept and make a physical copy of that. So that's one of the reasons why we have Project 2, which sort of shows you how you can go from 2D images to a 3D physical representation of an object. So. The other podcast I want you to listen to is Guido van Rossum. Guido van Rossum happens to be the developer of Python, which we will be covering in great detail between now and the end of the semester. And one of the things that I want you to take out of this particular interview is the fact that Guido van Rossum never really intended to say, I'm going to make Python so that everybody can use it. He actually had more modest goals, which is to essentially take programming to the education market. Okay? A lot of these people who we see in technology never really meant to become famous or become wealthy. It just happens to be something that they sort of were lucky enough to that they wanted to pursue passionately, and come up with the associated fame, and not necessarily fortune, but fame. So he was one that didn't really just wanted Python as a language for educators to be able to use. And because of that, you too can program. So if you look at this little article here, a lot of the first graders now in some countries are being encouraged to take programming classes, partly because it's a skill that I think is necessary to understand and control technology. So, and that's one of the reasons I do fit it into this class, because it became obvious to me that there are some people, seniors in particular, who will be graduating and going into the job market and not have a sense of what it means to actually program something. For those of you who are already programmers, I apologize, but I think most people who have learned how to program will realize that there's a lot of conceptual barriers associated with programming, because it's a totally different way of actually tackling certain problems. And sometimes you don't see that in some of your other classes that involve more humanistic points of view, less stringent goals. But that's what we'll try to cover as best we can for the rest of the semester. So you can do it. So it'll be Python's Lab A, B, and C. If you wish, you can actually click on those links and you'll see exactly what we're going to do. And it is my intent to actually go over each of these labs and give you the answers. And you may be wondering, well, what good is that? Well, believe it or not, even if I give you the answers, trying to get these things to work can be a little challenging, just because one of the processes that you have to go through is, one, type in the program and then getting it to work without making mistakes. And that in itself is a challenge if you've never programmed before. So even though I go through this process with you, it's my experience that you will try to make it run yourself and find out that it really doesn't work and you don't know what's going on. So I'm giving you all the answers ahead of time. We'll go through each of these as part of the lecture. So you may, one, see it, two, try to do it yourself, make the mistakes, and then repeat. Okay? And you can't, it's just like anything else, or more like a lot of things that require practice. These are things that don't come easily unless you actually go in and do it. It's sort of like trying to learn how to drive a car from a book or from YouTube. It just doesn't work. Although I think there was an 8-year-old kid who actually did learn how to drive from a YouTube video, but that's another story. So, and there's a different way of thinking with regard to programming. So there's actually a couple of optional labs also that I'll present later in the class. So next week we'll have the database lab and lecture next week, and Blair will actually come in and talk a little bit about the ArcGIS Online part, and I will get the rest of the pictometry or the EagleView questions in place after talking to Andy. Extra credit labs will be made available in the semester, later in the semester. Just to give you a sense of that, one of them will likely be a LaTeX lab. It is one of the things that we've been trying to push into the class to do, because I think it's an important one, just because if you ever write papers in the future, doing it in LaTeX has a lot of advantages, as you may have already heard from Brian's lecture. Also, if you're going to generate a lot of formulas, LaTeX is one of those standards associated with that. If you ever decide to pursue a graduate degree and you have to write a dissertation, LaTeX is my recommendation to use. If you're going to generate a 10-page report, Google Docs and Microsoft Word is sufficient. If you're going to generate 50 to 100-page document, I would definitely highly encourage you to think about using LaTeX just because it's a lot easier to recover from a disaster if you were word file. If your word file dies, that's it. But because LaTeX is based on text that you can actually read, it'll help. And also the formatting just looks much. It's more beautiful than any Word document that I've seen. So LaTeX will probably be one of those extra credit labs. All right, so we'll get into Python. And we'll talk about how to program in Python. But before that, just to give you a sense of what it is, how much detail you need to really think about for certain things. How many people here drive? People drive. Okay, so if you were to tell a car to change lanes, what are the steps that you would take? How would you express that information? Yes, Cassie.
You have to decide that you're going to change lanes.
Okay.
Flick the lever to indicate the blinker.
Yep.
Whichever direction.
Yep.
Check the mirrors.
Yep.
Actually look behind you real
Yep.
quick. And then begin moving the wheel in a given direction.
Okay.
And finish the process. And flick the blinker off. Resume driving normally.
Guess what? What? You said turn the wheel.
I said to complete the process.
What does complete the process mean?
To finish the pass in the next lane, or rather to move
Okay.
to the next lane.
And this is what I'm trying to indicate is that when you're dealing with computers, you have to be very specific. Okay? You can't just say complete the process. What does complete the process mean? Right? So these are the kinds of things that engineers have to deal with if they start dealing with self-driving cars. Right? What most people will say is that, okay, I'm going to turn the wheel. Okay. Guess what? What do you have to do in order to safely negotiate into the next lane? You have to turn the wheel in the same amount in order to go straight. Right? So, because if you don't, you're out into the breakdown lane into the fields. Right? Those are the kind of details that you really have to keep in mind when you're doing sort of programming. Because programming, the computer will do everything that you tell it to do. Not necessarily what you want it to do, but everything that you tell it to do. Right? And that's nothing and that's one of the things that we want to sort of train you in trying to analyze things in great detail. So that if there's something that doesn't work, you have to step back and say, okay, what is it that actually happened? So that's just the kind of amount of detail that you really need to do in order to do get programs to work. Okay? Just because you want a computer to do something, it may not necessarily do what you want it to do, but it'll do what you told it to do. So, and just to show that it's not that hard to program, if you have a Mac, or if you, and we'll talk about for people who are on Windows, you can start up a terminal. So you can go here, yes?
What was the name of the program real quick that you said to use if you're writing like a 50 to 60 page dissertation?
LaTeX. LaTeX, L-A-T-E-X. It was developed by Donald Knuth. Oh, actually,
okay.
no, it's Tech is the one developed by Donald Knuth, but it is something that people should know about.
Like
What's that?
Why is it pronounced LaTeX and not latex?
I think there are some people who pronounce it that way, but potato.
Is there a reason? It's just
I think it's just historical. There probably is a reason. I just call it LaTeX. LaTeX is for Leslie Lamport. Lamport was the guy person who actually. Tech is the typesetting product that Donald Knuth made, but it was so hard to use that somebody else wrote a front end to it in order to make it easier to generate the typesetting. Okay, So the idea, did Brian go through the history of LaTeX at all, or tech? Somebody? No? So Donald Knuth, computer scientist, was very disillusioned by how people made equations, how the people who published this paper made equations. And he got so upset by it that he basically said, oh, I'm going to make my own typesetting program. And next thing you know, that's what he did. He actually made his own typesetting program. And it's been so good that people still use it to this day. So it's just one of those situations where computer scientists was doing something that really wasn't his main research. He just happened to develop a tool. And you see that a lot with people who try to make tools. So for those of you who may not know it, Slack was actually developed by a company who was into video games. Their main reason for existing was to actually make video games. But they wanted to communicate with people, so that they decided to make this communication platform. And next thing you know, they're not doing video games anymore. They're doing Slack now because it's been so successful. So yet another situation where a company or an individual decides to make a tool, but that tool becomes so good that whatever they were trying to do in the first place becomes secondary. So. All right. Good questions, though. So on a Mac, you can go to the terminal. And as we mentioned before, this is a command line interface, CLI. And just so you can see it, I will actually make it larger. And I can never remember how to do this, but I'll try. And we've seen this. And you can start programming two ways. You can either use an editor that already exists here, or if you're on a PC, you can load the program called idle. So idle is think of it as a front end to Python. And it's nothing more really than a glorified text editor.
Can you run it on Sublime?
I don't know Sublime.
Oh, okay.
I don't use Sublime. I try to do, there's so many other packages that I try to make things as low level as possible so that people don't have to deal with other pieces. So can everybody see this, or do I have to make it larger?
So
Yeah.
Python is already on our computer.
Yes, it is. It is already on your computer if you have a Mac. If you have a PC, you may have to download it from python.org. And my recommendation is to actually use the idle interface just for consistency. Okay. So it's already there.
How did you get there?
I use the terminal. So in fact, let me just get out of idle and show you how you would do this without using idle by just the command line. So if you get to the command line, you can just type Python. Okay, you get that. And just for this class, we are going to be using Python 2, right? There's Python 3, but I want to use Python 2.7 just because there are some, not so much inconsistencies, but one of the issues with the open source is that sometimes you get some disagreements with the people who work on the project. And Python 3 made a lot of changes that actually broke a lot of things that were written in Python 2. So just for consistency, I like to stay with Python 2. From here, that's something that I want you to keep in mind. We are using Python 2.7, not Python 3. Okay? So again, I repeat, we are using Python 2.7, not Python 3. Yes?
If you try to download Python from its original website, won't it automatically download the latest version of Python?
No, you can actually go back to older versions of Python. So that is something that you do have the option to go to do that. So Python 2.7 is what we will be using. Yes.
On the Python website, it has the option to download Python 2.
Yes. Good.
So that's what we should download.
That's what you should download. Okay. In other classes, they may say let's do Python 3, but for the purpose of this class, let's do Python 2.7. I also like using Python 2.7 because Esri, the thing that Blair talked about, that big monolithic monopoly of a GIS system, they use Python to actually control their system. Okay. The other thing also why I teach Python is that Blender, which is one of the animation softwares that we'll actually be presenting, has a Python interface. Okay. What does it mean to have a Python interface? It just means that you can control programs not so much by clicking and pointing to menus. You can actually send it commands to have it do things. Right? So that's what you mean by having an interface. In fact, the term API is something that you'll hear a lot. An API to some service. API stands for Application Programmers Interface. Okay. So when somebody says, I want to get the API for Instagram, for instance, what that means is that there's a programmer who will try to control services by typing certain commands. Okay, so API is one of those terms that you'll hear a lot. Application Programmers Interface. And by learning how to program, you can actually control some of these services, provided that you know how to make those calls. Okay. And one of the things that I emphasized before when we were doing Excel is the concept of the function. Okay. What's the concept of the function? Or what are the parts of the function? The name of the function, the arguments of the function, and how many arguments and the type of arguments. And we'll revisit that also when we go into Python. So let's create a program. So most programmers will actually type the file in, create the known as the Hello World program. So in Python, it's fairly straightforward. You say hello world. Created a program. Okay. Other languages, you have to do so many things in order for it to get it to do this, just this, right? To make it to add, you just say print 2 + 2. It may seem rather trivial, but that's the beauty of Python, is that can be relatively trivial. Okay. Python is also a little different than other programming languages in that it's what's known as interactive, right? In other words, if you're trying to understand what a command does, you can actually type it in and then get immediate feedback on what it does. That way, you can test things as you go through this, and that's what the purposes of the Lab A is, to have you actually go through and just test different pieces of Python. Right? So you can assign variables to Python. So if I say a = 2, I can say print a + a. So we're allowing to have variables be set up. I can then say b = a + a, print b. So the concept of variables here is that you will have some name variable and assign a value to it. I can say C = hello. Say D = world. And I can say E = C + D. If I print E, what do you expect to see? but not what you probably thought, right? We were not explicit about what needs to be, what we expect to see. Most people would have expected it to see hello space world. But again, Python and programming, you have to be explicit about these things. So in order for this to actually come up the way we expect it to, we can say f equals c plus space d. So now if I say print f, that's what we expected. Right? There are also a lot of characters that we can't see here that we'll talk about as we actually start playing around with different types of data types. So the key thing that I also want people to understand is data types. Okay. There are different types of data in programming. If we said type of A, first of all, let's look at A, print A, 2. If I say type of A, it tells me that's an integer. Let's print F. I'd say type of F tells me it's a string. So, can I do this? Why not? Why not? Yes.
Well, because it's 2 different data types.
Correct. You cannot do that. And this is where you run into what are known as syntax errors and or errors in general. And to the uninitiated, this can be a little scary and also not very hard to read. But it is possible to actually understand what what the errors say. And it's basically saying that I have a plus sign. I'm trying to use the plus sign for 2 different data types. Okay, because they are incompatible, it doesn't work. Okay, there's some issue associated with that. So one of the things that you need to understand is what kind of data type are you working with, because it really matters in programming languages how that works. Right? Print 1 plus 1 is different from print 1 plus 1. So you have to be very careful about your data types. And you do that by using the type command to tell you what it is you're looking at. So you can actually give an expression and ask it, what is the resulting data type? And it's telling you it's a string. Why is that a string? Because these are quotes. So what we're doing is we're saying, treat the number 1 not as a value, but as a string.
So do all strings have quotations?
Yes, for the most part, if we put quotations around strings, that will work, right?
What's the difference between putting the double quotes and the single quotes?
Double quotes and single quotes are interchangeable. They come in the case where, suppose I want to actually specify a quote. Okay, so if I wanted to say this, if I want to say print, this is a double quote, right? And I will actually say oops. Right. How do you actually show a quote here? And the way to do that is to put it in single quotes. So you can use double quotes and single quotes interchangeably, depending on the context. So in Python 2.7, there is this little quirk that you should know about. And what's the answer to this? Any other answers that people may want to express? It is 0. Why? Because these two things are integers. Okay. In integer math, there are no decimal points. Okay. And that's something that you need to keep in mind. If I said 9 divided by 5, it's just 1. In order for you to actually force it to actually do what you think, you would have to say print 9 divided by 5.0. Something to keep in mind. Integer math is technically just regular math, but without the decimal point. Okay. Part of the reason it exists is that it's actually a much faster computation to make. And in some situations, pixel values, for instance, it's all integers. There is no pixel value of 24.53. So integers are important. If I want to say value is equal to 9 divided by 5.0, I can look at the value, I can look at that data type and realize that that's actually a float. Right? So this is very important when we actually start doing some calculations, because sometimes what you have to do is you have to take information, read it in as a string, and somehow alter it to be a number, right?
So why can you, when you wrote print 5 over 9, could you put 9.0 to solve the problem?
Yes, that will work also. So you can actually say 9.0. Wait, this one.
5 over 9.0.
Yep, that'll work also. So if I now, so you get that. Okay. Yes.
What's the difference between writing print or doing something and not?
Print is an explicit. Sometimes you can just say 9 divided by 5 divided by 9.0, and it will do that. It'll show you that interactively. But when you start writing programs, you have to be explicit about it. So that's why I always type print, because right now we're just doing things interactively. But one of the things that we want to do with programming is to actually start saving all these commands into a file in order that we can run it again, and either run it definitively or run it multiple times. Right now we're just interactively with the Python console. We're learning the different parts of the language, and later what we will do is take everything that we've done here and put it into a file and see it execute. Okay, and that's the power of being able to automate something, is to being able to store away all those commands so that we can easily run it again. Okay. But at this point, what we're doing is we're just learning all the different aspects of a language, of the Python language. Okay. So those are some more primitive data types. There are more exotic data, not exotic, but more high-level data types, and one is called the list. Okay, so I can say L is equal, L is bad, M equals list. What is a list? Nothing more than a collection of objects. About how long a list is by applying the len function. And I'm just showing you this now because we'll actually write our own len function so that we can count the number of elements. If I want to access the different components of this list, I can say print m of 0 to access the first component. And the last component is of 2. Okay. So we start with 0. This is what's known as zero-based index. Which means that in order for you to access different components of a list, you start with the number 0. As you can see, lists can hold different data types. It can hold either it can hold all data types that we've seen so far. And in fact, you can actually hold lists of lists. I can actually embed this in yet another list. Let's call this yet another list, YAL. Is equal to hello, comma, m. Might blow your mind a little bit, but if I say print YAL, what you've seen is that we've embedded this initial list into this list. And this is where that's the power of actually coming up with being able to do this, is so you can get as complicated as you want with data structures and be able to access all those pieces. Right? Cassie, do you have a question?
It's basically set notation, right?
Yes, essentially, it's sort of a set type notation. It's a little not as stringent, so. And this is also a way to illustrate the fact that if, suppose I wanted to get to this number 3 there. Well, one would probably say something like print YAL 2. Oops. And that's, can somebody tell me why this is wrong? Why I made the mistake? And that's what I'll be doing. If I make mistakes, I'll try to have people think about what the mistake was. Yes. That's right. There's only the length of the YAL. In fact, if we say print len of YAL, there's only 2, but because we started at 0, if I had used the index 2, it's wrong. So. Does that make sense?
No, I don't get it.
Okay. So let's print YAL. Okay. YAL has only 2 elements or 2 components made at this level. YAL of 0 is hello. YAL of 1 is this list. All right. So there is no YAL of 2. And that's why it's giving me an error. Okay.
So you say, what do you call those things? It's got 2 what?
Which one?
Like what? No, what's the broad term for those 2 elements?
These 2 elements, they're just elements. They're elements of a list. So the question is, how do I get to the number 3 here? The way you would do that is something like this. You would say YAL of 1 and 0, 1, 2. Now, often, if you're trying to get to the very end of a list, or the last component of a list, there's actually a notation where you can say YAL of -1, -1, and you get the same thing, because -1 always gives you the very last element. So I could have said, no matter how long a list is, if it's like 100,000 elements, if I say -1, it'll always give me the last element. Yes.
If you redefine variable m,
Mhm.
and then I did print YL again, it still gave me the same m that was originally in YL.
I believe it will. So you tried to modify m? Yeah, because m would be a, it doesn't propagate. It doesn't reference it. There are, and that's a very good thing to think about, because there are some languages where modifying something once it's placed in the list can be problematic, because what it's doing is it's just actually not making a copy of that list. It's doing what's known as a reference to that. So that's a very good question to have and keep in mind, because there are some languages where if you do that, it actually still points back to the, if you make the modification to that value, it'll propagate to the other pieces. So just be careful of that. That possibility does exist. So, okay. So what else did I want to talk about with lists? Lists. So if I say type of M, it'll tell you that it's a list. Now, a lot of these data structures, and that's what a list is a data structure or a data type. Okay, they have internal functions that allow them to be processed. So if I type dir and then do it on M, what this tells you is that it gives you a list. So it's kind of meta. Gives you a list of some of the functions that can operate on this data type. Okay. So what I tell people when they do this is to ignore the ones that have the underscores in front of them. Those tend to be specialized ones that programmers may use to do. But those that don't have those underscores are things that you can actually possibly use. Right? So this is a list, and you see certain ones here that you can do. So if I said m dot reverse print m, it's just that. Actually flipped the elements. It's actually tried that before. It used to be the 1 3.0. If I do the same thing to YAL dot reverse, well, first of all, let's print YAL, right? So if I say YAL dot reverse, that's it. So part of being productive in a language is knowing some of these functions that are embedded, that are inherent to the data type. If we look at dir on, okay, there are also, for the floating point data type, there are different things that you can apply also to that. But just keep in mind that if you have a data type, you can always type the dir command, and what it'll do is it'll give you a sense of what kind of functions can you apply to that data type. So if we look at strings, for instance, dir, let's see. You can see that there's a whole list of things that you can do here. So let's create a variable. Let's call it string equals the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. Does anybody remember where this? Does anybody know where this comes from? No, you've heard it though, right? Rebecca.
It uses some letters in the alphabet.
That's right. This is actually what people used to when they used to buy typewriters. when they used to go in and pick out their typewriter, they would actually type this to see if all the keys are good, right? And you don't want to do just the lowercase. You want to do the uppercase. So I can actually say something like string dot upper.
How does it know that you wanted to do that to that particular? Oh no.
How did it? Good question. It's how did you know that it wanted to do it on that particular variable? Well, the syntax here is the dot. Okay. So what this is saying, I'm the variable, but I want you to use the function that I know about. Okay. It's a very good question because the other way of actually invoking functions is to have the function name and then the argument in it. Okay, this is just a little special way of doing it. Okay. We can also do the following, where I can say words is equal to words equals string dot split. I can say print words. And what you've done here is if you've taken the string, which is one long set of characters, and broke it up into a set of words. Because there is a distinction if I say print string of 0. What's somebody's guess as what the answer will be here? Cassidy?
Yeah.
D. But if I say print words of 0, that's what you'll get. If I say print string of -1, guesses? G. Very last element. And then if I say print words of -1, yes. Empty parentheses.
After split.
And the split, okay. There are, so split is a function, okay? The empty parentheses represent arguments to that function. Sometimes what you can do is you can actually tell it, there's certain arguments you can take. So in this case, I want to, sort of a bad example, but let's do the following. If I say new words is equal to string dot split of, I think this might work. I may be failing on this one. Okay. Can you infer what I did there? Excellent question. It's an excellent question. What is it? What is that there? What is this doing there? Okay. Well, what it does is it allows you to actually specify what your delimiters will be. So in this case, I said, okay, split the string using the O as my delimiter. In other words, anything that's an O will be split up into separate pieces. And that's what you see here. As you can see, O was used as our delimiter. Normally, as humans, we look at the space as our delimiter. But to a computer, it doesn't matter. Okay? You can give it an O as a delimiter, and what you see here is that it split up the string using the O as a delimiter. So that the parentheses that you have here is just a place where you can put special arguments to change the behavior of that function. In much the same way that we give arguments to the average function in Excel to do the calculation. Okay. So if you think of concatenate, the concatenate function, you give it the arguments of the two strings that are supposed to be put together. In case of decimal to binary. You give it the value of the value that you want to create in the binary, and if need be, you can put an option of the number of spaces that you need. Okay. All right. So Python's not that hard. Okay, you just need to know a couple of things about it. It's one of the things that you'll experience is that you can't get stuff to work, but once you get it to work, you're like, yes, I got things to work. And that is a very satisfying feeling. So we'll continue with this on Thursday, and we'll actually go through Python Lab A in greater detail to actually help you work on that. So I will be asking the TAs to actually have more than one person there so that I know that some of you haven't programmed before. You'll have enough people to help you with these concepts. Okay? All right. We'll see you guys and trick or treat. Yes. I actually have to proctor an exam now, and
You say you need to practice an exam?
what's that?
You need to practice an exam?
Yeah.
Now?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
It's in about. What you got?
I took some questions most of my grades.
Okay.
I cannot see the comments.
Okay.
So I just wonder what we're on the platform.
Okay. Contact your TA. Oh no, this is Brian. Yeah. Contact Brian and ask him.
So should I send him?
Yeah. Send him an email. Carbon copy me on it. So okay. Right.
And also like, I just wonder, can I change because like I just cannot contact. And when I sent her.
Okay. Did you carbon copy me on that conversation?
Well, I didn't get any of my last graded
Okay.
email, and so I feel a little bit lost in this class because I didn't know my position.
Okay. Who's your TA?
It's like,
Mia?
There's Mio. There's Jackie. There's Uten, and there's Sihan.
and like the last time I asked you, you said she cannot get access to that.
Right. She could not get access to Blackboard.
I cannot get any response.
All right. Whenever you get in that situation in the future, not just for this class, carbon copy your professor. Okay. Because what that does is that they know that I know that there's a conversation going on, and for her to ignore that is not. Okay?
Thank you.
但是project 2, and I know you have to, you don't have to opt, you don't have to opt out, but when you give opt outs, because like due kind of soon, and I don't understand it.
So what you do is you pick an object.
Yeah.
And then you take a picture of
But
it.
like, how do you get like backgrounds for like all of the, how is that even possible for like all of the different angles?
Well, you can move.
Like move it.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, like I said, this is not going to work in some depending on what object you select. So
And like, should I use like a camera or a phone or?
you can use both. Either one. Either one. So
I think I'm gonna have to ask you about those questions in the future.
that's fine. No, I mean, think of this as you're at a job and somebody gives you this project to do. You know, you do it. You ask a lot of questions, but no, you're doing the right thing. So, but one thing that I encourage is to actually make an attempt of doing it, because what that often does is that it'll formulate more relevant questions. So I would say go and do experiment with it. Just do it, and then say, okay, there's a part here that I don't understand what to do. So, but encourage you to experiment with that. You know, don't feel like you have to wait to get all the steps in place. So, okay. Yep.
Alright, so you told me after the exam to contact you about the form sheet.
Yep. So I saw that you friended me, which is good. So the question is that can you show me what you have?
Yes.
Okay. But quick question.
Yeah, like about the courses. Do you have any recommendations?
Which one?
For computer science. Minor actually.
Minor? What do you for future classes? Have you taken?
No, CS courses. I just consider to take a minor.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a class that I'll be teaching in the summer though. That's which is computer image processing and computer vision. $299.
Sure.
$99. Yeah, it's in the summer.
Wow. Do you have any like spring or?
No, I spring I can't do. The summer I do, and that one actually involves using also Raspberry Pi. I don't know if you ever, and it's meant more for non-CS majors. So
Do you know those? Like, cause for me, honestly, I don't really like. I'm not trying to be a programmer.
Yep.
Like, cause I just want to have some general common sense
Yep.
about it. Cause I'm just
the art of programming is a good one to do. It's because it's still Python. So what it'll do is it'll work off of what we're going through here. One of the reasons I do this is that people can work with Python in an environment where it's very, very simple problems, very simple problems. And what the 171, I think, art of programming is they'll do Python, but in a more involved scenario. So that's one way. Do you want to do web development at all? Because web development is another one that you can
it's
you can take.
161.
I don't know. It's
Yeah.
Costin, Professor
Yeah.
Costin. Yeah.
I've got 170 with him right now. It's a related class. He's a pretty good professor.
170.
Yeah, that one's front end. That one's web design.
Yeah,
so like
web design.
HTML
Yep.
intro.
It's easy.
Well, I'm
okay.
having a fun time with it.
Okay.
Yeah, some people like doing that kind of stuff.
But,
I
like,
don't. I have no design.
I'm
I have
more
no
into
design.
than,
Yeah,
like, that.
Because
yeah.
I honestly I don't want to get into very deep into the computer science major.
Mhm.
I just want to have a common sense
Yeah.
because I'm planning to like open a company with it.
Okay.
So I have to have some common sense about it, but I don't
Yeah.
need to very like involve in too deep because I'm not gonna do the work.
You're
I'm
not gonna do the work,
Yeah. I just wanna,
Yes. So that might be a good one because what that allows you to do, because anybody that has a company will have to deal with some design aspect of it. So web design is probably a good one to
so
be familiar with
1
because that's your front end. That's that's your front facing view to the world. So
Uh-huh.
people have to so if you hire a designer to do your website,
Uh-huh.
you have to be able to talk to them to
Yeah,
know what they can do.
So,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
So that's a good one to have an
I
idea.
can show you one of the labs that
Let's-
was
Okay,
done.
so I sent myself all of the pictures on my
Uh-huh.
phone, so these are all the pictures.
Yeah.
And then,
So like actually to describe
I have
it,
like
that's-
my
Yeah.
My
Okay.
most
So that's
recent-
working. So now what you have to do is go into
I have
IFT.
a major, but I'm doing
Do you have an
it because I'm
IFTTT
minor.
account?
Yes.
Cluster for
So you
my
got that.
natural science thing. So we learned to build pages
Oh,
like this. We also learned
So
to
now what you
use
want to
basic
do is you
math
want to create a
and
new.
navigation
So
and
we'll go
such.
here. New applet.
No, which is great.
So
'cause I don't
if
like
this
to
then that, which means that
Yeah.
if you check into Swarm,
So here we go.
which is actually Foursquare. Stupid, but
So, like,
so
What we're
So
working
click
on
on
most recently
look for
is the
Foursquare.
PHP include, which is more of a back-end process, and like a server-side process.
There it is.
thing, but that's not really.
What you want to do is any new check-in tag.
This, it's not supposed to be.
The tag will be CSC 108.
do I put the hashtag
That I can't remember. So it's
C-
I can-
With problems.
CSC
108.
108? Is it dash fall or just?
No, just 108. So whenever you check in, you have to put that hashtag in the check-in. So
Okay, no, it says put the hashtag examples.
okay, yeah, okay. So create trigger. What do you want it to do? So what you want it to do now is go into Google
Well, that-
Drive.
Set up things. I
and
know it's really
then
simple.
add
Okay.
row to spreadsheet. Oops, oh, I didn't touch that.
Yeah.
So that should be fine. You just need to, that's the correct, you need to change the name of the
Like it's a
spreadsheet name to
It's
yours.
not like
Is it CSC
Yep, CSC
just
108,
108
space fall,
and he also has an
2017.
advanced.
and then,
That means it's one.
My name?
yeah, yep.
And do you have any other?
Oops.
I
Oh
just
my gosh, you can
This is my first semester with this. So I'm like, well, this is
And,
fun.
Do you
say,
have any
all the
other
way down
things
and say create action.
Well, I'm considering doing web design. Like as a freelance.
Good,
So I'm
so
all set?
finish, yep. So now what I would do now is try to test that and just
I'm gonna take.
do another check-in into any of the venues here and then put pound CSC 108 on it and see if
Okay.
it creates the, so what you have to do is you have to look for the spreadsheet.
I don't
in
know
my
what's beyond that.
Rolodex?
Yes, it'll be under IFTTT, so it'll be
It's advising. What year are you?
in my, so it'll be in there.
Okay, so
Full square. Oh, you have some stuff here.
Well, that was when I attempted to do it with my TA and couldn't figure it out properly. Like it wasn't registering.
So let's look at some of them. That one didn't.
And it was also checking in the wrong time. So that was when we did
Right,
that. That was
so-
not at 10:57.
right,
That was
so
at
what I
6 or 7.
I think is that their browser, their servers are not updating
Oh,
often enough, yeah. So,
Okay. I mean, it was the right date, but like 3 hours later.
yes, yeah, I've noticed that with a lot of people also.
Okay. But it allowed me to check in, but it was
Yes.
also not like connected to the right, like IFTTT and that thing.
I don't know
So-
if he does both classes.
But I
now-
think if they, I think it's just takes a while for it to do that. So it looks like it was
He probably
working,
does it
so,
both semesters.
I think you were-
But check with him.
Okay.
Yeah.
all right, so it'll do it again and then this time I think it'll,
Yeah, probably.
Okay. And then you have access to this, or do I share this with
you
you?
have to give me access to that, so. So you have to give rolando.requeño@gmail.
And what do I do with the previous pictures that I have of you? Like proof that I went to all my courses. Like how do I just
You could just share, put it in a folder and share that with me, but.
put it
that's,
in?
Yeah, but we're gonna do the next semester, the latter half of the semester fresh.
Completely separate?
Yeah.
Okay,
So
great. So from now on, I should be like, once I check in and use
Yep.
the hashtag, it should automatically be
It should
updated.
automatically, and you should check in on it on occasion.
Check up
One-
on this.
Yeah,
Okay.
and one thing that you can do is under tools, is notification rules. And what you wanted to do is that any changes are made, email yourself right away.
Okay.
So what that does, if I type something there, you'll get an email that I've made a change, or if when you've actually checked in and it added that row, you'll
Mhm.
get an email.
Oh, okay.
So that way you know that if you checked in to Swarm, that it made it all the way to the spreadsheet. So, okay.
I understand. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
So other classes,